It's all terrifying.
Alexa's not in here.
Alexa,
We're just recording
protect.
on the internet.
We're on the internet.
This is live right now to Jeff Bezos' living room.
Straight direct feed to Jeff Bezos' living room.
For the record, I like not having to leave my house, so
Granted,
there's that.
I'm a big fan of that. I also am not a big fan, though, of the fact that Jeff Bezos made more in the last 2 seconds than we have all made collectively in our lives together.
Well, that's okay. I don't mind that so much. What I hate about him is he puts out small businesses by undercutting their prices.
Yeah, but I mean, 2-day free shipping.
It's really hard to argue
Free
with.
the shipping.
Welcome to the Casual Fanatics. I am Paul Stadden. This is Sydnee Johnson, and that is Jeremy Rozelle. We have to start off with our main question of the week, which is, what property just wouldn't work today? And here's the thing. It could be something that actually is going to be remade and is going to come out, and we'll talk about why it won't work. But we're also going to, of course, go over those things that are the classic. Here's why the thing just doesn't work in today's society. So my pick this week is James Bond. I don't know how you guys feel, but when I watch old James Bond movies from before Timothy Dalton, like basically Sean Connery and Roger Moore, but not George Lazenby because nobody cares.
It's true.
It's true.
It's not wrong.
Sorry, George.
It's not wrong.
But you watch Goldfinger, and he's like, "All right, man, talk," and slaps the girl on the butt, and she walks away. So much of James Bond is based in what now would be called toxic masculinity. But I just think that you look at half of what those movies are, and you couldn't make like half of the movies. I don't mean like half the movies that came out. I mean like half of any James Bond movie from the 1960s. If you were to do it now, it would be like an hour's worth of material, maybe. So, I don't know. Do you guys get the same sense when you watch an old James Bond movie?
I'm pretty sure today Octopussy would be celebrated.
Did you just win my argument? I don't know.
I might have. I don't know.
Good Lord, man. But part of it also is it's not just that people have begun arguing whether you could do James Bond as a woman in the movies. It's a matter of this entire personality, this womanizing, drinking spy, just isn't really translating. And they tried to really change him up, and they tried to reboot him. And Daniel Craig in Casino Royale, I think, did probably the best job that you can do in a 21st century Bond, which I'm glad that erased a lot of where we got back to kind of the goofy James Bond with Pierce Brosnan. But you show him at the beginning of Casino Royale where he's in the hotel room with a woman, and instead of sleeping with her, he goes about his mission. There's an explanation for his womanizing with the death of Vesper Lynd. Spoilers for a movie that came out 15 years ago, by the way. But
I think all of us here have seen it.
I think fetuses have seen that movie.
You might be right.
I'm probably right. But that movie really tried to explain why James Bond is the way he is, and then you can kind of get away with keeping a little bit of the womanizing James Bond because you say, oh, well...
It was the origin story. It was the origin story for James Bond.
Yeah.
And I'll say this, like, I mean, I agree with you. I don't know that you can get away with the things that we saw. Of course, I grew up watching James Bond movies,
right.
so I love James Bond movies.
Hey, same here.
Same here.
I don't think you could necessarily get away with making it, but it kind of makes me sad that, like, that's an archetype. That's like a classic archetype. And not one that, like, even as a female that I find particularly offensive. It's a movie archetype.
Yeah.
And I kind of accept that. Once again, I grew up with these movies. I liked action spy movies growing up. I was a big action movie fan. No, I don't think you can get away with a lot of the behaviors and the jokes. I think people would come down on it. But part of me finds that really unfortunate, honestly, because, like, I love the Sean Connery James Bond. And I love even Roger Moore. I mean, there's a lot of the older Bond films that, I mean, some of them, even Pierce Brosnan aside, and I grew up in the Pierce Brosnan era. So that was some of my first James Bond movies were Pierce Brosnan.
Right.
But, like, even before that, it was a little goofy in the spy gadgets and the things that they would do. And there was kind of that goofy element to it.
It was campy. It was like 60s Batman.
And now, like, what I do love that they did with Daniel Craig is they made a more serious Bond.
Yeah.
And I think he did a phenomenal job. I love Craig's Bond.
Well, and they tried to make a more serious Bond with Timothy Dalton in the 1980s, although, you know, they kept some of the one-liners. They kept the one-liners in Casino Royale, too, where he looks at Mads Mikkelsen, who always has eye things going on. You know, I won't consider it a problem unless I start weeping blood, you know, and then those kinds of things. But I think part of the "it couldn't happen today" is not just the sexism, which I see as kind of a reflection of the time. Mm-hmm. I look at those James Bond movies, and even though I cringe, I also say, well, this is very indicative of where the society was at that time. So to dismiss it wholly is to kind of doom history to being swept under the rug.
Almost, yeah. And I don't, honestly, my personal opinion on that is I don't think it does us any favors to ignore it.
No.
Obviously, I don't want that behavior happening in the workplace. Like,
no.
You know, I'm not advocating for that. But I'm saying in an 80s film, I somewhat expect it.
Yeah.
And I'm somewhat just okay with, like, it's an 80s Bond film and it's a little campy and it's a little sexist and, like, it's period appropriate.
It is. I'm glad. I think of everything that has gone away, the thing that you couldn't get away with now is definitely not just the sexism, but the camp, which I'm actually really glad. But I think that we have swung really far the other way, obviously, with the gritty reboot syndrome that happened in the mid to late 2000s. And Casino Royale could have been swept up in that. Mm-hmm. And I think that they were starting to go that way a little bit with Quantum of Solace, where they were forgetting to make a good plot or a plot at all. So you introduce Spectre, and then you're like, forget Spectre. Let's deal with the Water Wars.
Water Wars.
Great idea, guys. But you did get rid of a lot of the camp, and even when you have things like in Skyfall with the Komodo dragon fight and everything like that, you still accept it. Whereas I go back and I watch something like To Live and Let Die, and the Bond villain who gets inflated and floats into the ceiling and explodes. And Roger Moore running on the crocodile heads. Like, okay.
Best movie ever.
I will say, though, we actually have... I say that the camp wouldn't work. The camp wouldn't work in James Bond because we have determined that he is going to be a gritty, realistic kind of character. But the camp, we have done some incredible things now with humor. Like you could have a crocodile head running scene like in a Marvel movie.
Yes.
You could do that.
Yes.
You could get away with that because you set that up as a humorous, campy thing. But we're so far removed from James Bond because he's a serious spy. And I'm actually okay with that with James Bond. You couldn't get away with a sexist, campy James Bond today, and I'm actually just fine with that. Although I do agree with you. I don't like the going back and the revising and the getting rid of, like, we couldn't watch Goldfinger. It's too sexist. Like, watch it as a document of the time.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the racist cartoons of the 1930s. Being said, there's the Warner Brothers censored 11, the 11 cartoons that you can never show on TV. Mm-hmm. And I think that they did it really well. In one of the Looney Tunes collections, they have Whoopi Goldberg introduce it and say, so you're going to see some racist characters in these cartoons. They are documents of the time. We're not advocating that these things are okay by releasing this. We are merely documenting that this is the way things were. And I think that's a really great idea of preserving the history, and you can see it in its proper context. And you can see James Bond in its proper context. And you can enjoy the gunfights and the driving around in cool Aston Martins. And then you can say, okay, but the sexism is wrong. But him slapping the girl on the butt and sending her away. Although it's funny because there are really strong female characters in the movies.
There are.
Pussy Galore and Goldfinger is amazing. Leads a bunch of women pilots who are going out and like doing the gas dropping on the Fort Knox. I mean, it's pretty impressive. It's
kind of funny that you mentioned it that way because there was, yes, there's documented like instances of sexism in these films, but there's also like a lot of female empowerment in this period of time.
There is.
And probably some of the, like, you would know better than I do, but like probably some of the first really strong female characters that we saw in action movies being in that kind of context in those kinds of movies. In the action movie and not just being the damsel.
Eye candy or damsel.
Getting outside of Grindhouse as well.
Had
a lot of,
Yeah, and I love seeing, and part of this, maybe it's being a dad now, is of a little girl, It's that I want good, strong female characters for my daughter to identify with, but I don't like the, I'm a girl and I can do it, like the over the top, like just
girl power.
It's like in the Simpsons fan in the room. It's like the Simpsons episode where Lisa goes up to the football game and says, "That's right, I'm a girl and I'm here to play." And Ned Flanders, the coach, says, "Oh, good, we got 2 girls on the team already." Well, I wouldn't want to play a game where you use a pig skin as the ball. Actually, it's made of plastic now. I have to go. And I think that people like are trying to force it. Like, just put the character in there, let it be somebody admirable, and don't point it out, and then you're going to really, really enjoy that. And that's why I think that Pussy Galore actually is, oddly, despite her name, and I keep saying it, but I think that it's actually interesting going back and looking at that character, that she is the second in command to Goldfinger. Mm-hmm. She's the one who commands these women pilots, and she's a strong female character. And they don't really deal with it too much, the fact that, oh, you're a woman and you're doing this? Yes, James does force himself on her, which is another part of the movie that is actually cringeworthy. But she's a strong female character that's not pointed out, and I absolutely love that. And it does make sense because it's coming out in the 1960s in the female empowerment movement. It's all concurrent with that. But it's interesting that kind of James Bond movies went further and further away from that the longer it went on. You go to Live and Let Die, which I mentioned earlier, and the female character in there is absolutely worthless and frustratingly so. And then Diamonds Are Forever, the female lead in that one is just a frustrating bimbo. So it's like they get into the female empowerment movement, and James Bond movies are like, okay, well, we're going to go the other way. Like, we're just going to make the ditziest women we can in these movies. I think it's unfortunate.
Almost like they didn't want to touch it at the time.
Like, whoa, no.
We don't want to mess with that. We don't know what's going on here.
Not interested.
We're trying to make action movies.
We're trying to make action movies here. Just watch these things explode. Watch Roger Moore run across crocodile heads. It'll be fine.
I actually find it really interesting as the dad of a little girl now to hear you say that, though, because like I grew up in, you guys are, I think, both a little bit older than I am, and I grew up in the 90s era of, kind of the original like girl power in cartoons. And like now I look at it and I'm a little bit disgusted by it. Like I'm a tiny bit disgusted by it in the essence of like, I'm a female and I don't really think about it that much. Like, why do we have to point it out? Why do we constantly, and I know I'm unique in like this viewpoint. Like, I know most women my age do not talk about it this way. It's a very odd viewpoint to take, and I'm probably treading a little dangerously saying these things.
Hey, that's what we're here to do.
But for me personally, like, I'm like, why must we like constantly point out that I'm a girl and I'm gonna do it? Like, I grew up with a bunch of male cousins and a brother. Like, I just did things.
You just do it.
We were if you were going to climb trees, we just climbed trees. We didn't really talk about the fact that I was a girl.
And I think, and that's an interesting perspective to take. So do you think it's kind of pandering a little bit?
I personally find it a little bit pandery.
Yeah.
And I personally find it like calling myself out as a female in, environments doesn't really mentally do me any favors. Like I'm a person and I can do what I want to do.
Right.
And I would rather take that viewpoint than, I have to prove something because I'm a female.
Yeah.
That to me doesn't do anything for anybody's mental state. And if anything, it just makes you more cognitive of the fact that you're different and you are supposed to be making up for something, or like so take this away from like the gender.
Right.
Just to avoid, because I'm probably gonna offend somebody here. I'm short. I'm 4'11".
Right.
And I am the kind of 4'11" that does not notice that it's 4'11" until I'm standing next to a dude who's like 6'8".
Right.
And then I'm like, oh, that's right. I'm really short. Like,
well, to be fair, I'm
Hang on.
5'7", and I stare up at somebody at 6'8", and I feel the same way.
I mean, yeah, but like, but do you walk around like I am a short person?
No, I do not.
Like, I don't think we notice. Like, the only time I ever notice is when I'm like standing next to somebody who is 6'8", and I'm like, oh yeah, I look like I'm 15 in a t-shirt and jeans. I should probably wear adult clothes. Like, like you don't think of it until that moment. And for the most part, like I don't want to walk around into rooms being like, I'm really short, because I feel like that doesn't do anything for your self-confidence in a situation or anything. And I kind of think about being female the same way I do about being short. It's if it doesn't bother me, it's not going to really bother anybody else. And if it does bother anybody else, I really don't care.
Yeah.
quick question. Do you feel like we've had this pendulum swing to the opposite direction, where we have movies that deal with the female empowerment, but it's also degrading towards men many times, like Captain Marvel, where it presents them as pig-headed, where there's like, hey, like, or inept, like. There's the moment where she's trying to become the pilot, and she's at the bar, and the dude walks up to her, and he's like, "That's why they call it a cockpit."
It's so heavy-handed,
and it's like
a little ham-fisted.
But my question is, in the future, when the pendulum moderates itself a little bit, will we look at that type of attitude the same way we look at?
Yeah, I think
I personally hope so. I already feel somewhat sorry for you dudes. Like, I really do, because it's a little imbalanced at the moment.
Yeah, commercials are a good example of this. And this is something now, thankfully, commercials are starting to realize, or commercial makers are starting to realize, that this has been a problem for a while. And partially because commercials are so short that you have to do a lot of shorthand with it. Mm-hmm. So the guy is obviously the one you're going to make the idiot, the low. I remember I think it was a Yoplait commercial where the husband is saying, "You said there was like a Boston cream pie in the fridge." And she's like, "It's in there. Just look, honey." And he's like pushing all this Yoplait Boston cream pie yogurt out of the way. Like, so are you indicating that he can't read? Is that where you're going, commercial? I don't understand what the point of this is. You know, and Brian Regan put it well. As like the commercial, like the wife is just like this all-knowing deity, and he's like, "I just don't understand why I put up with him." And then show the husband, he's like hanging in the drapes, like, "I don't know how I got in here."
That's amazing.
And it's been a problem with commercials for a very long time. And I actually, because I used to write commercials, well, I still write commercials for a living. Hire me. The thing I noticed that the rule was, you could have a dumb guy and a smart woman. You could have two dumb guys and you could have two dumb women, but you could never, under any circumstances, have a dumb woman and a smart guy, because that would have been seen as terribly sexist. And the problem is that I think that there's a sensitivity that happens to, like, even if the situation is a real one or a realistic one, you can't show it. And that bothers me a little bit, because I want to show something that could happen and we would all understand as something that could happen. That's what you do in movies. You are making something fake that is based on your real experiences, that feels real. Even if it's not real, even if it's unicorns battling each other in space, it still has to be grounded somewhere in your own perception. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that you can't do certain things that could really happen and would be totally acceptable and understandable just because they would be perceived a certain way. I know we're getting far afield from the sexist problem of James Bond, but I mean, it all ties together.
Yeah, no, it's a discussion I think needs to be had more. I mean, that's a relatable discussion. At what point is stereotyping not stereotyping? Yeah. Like, at what point are you just giving an expression of a situation that occurred?
Yeah, and I think intent matters a lot with it too.
It does.
You know, I mean, two friends who will bust each other's chops over stuff will say stuff to each other that you would never say to a stranger and wouldn't think to say to a stranger. And it's okay to say it to each other because you're buddies. And race may come into it. You know,
I've made terrible jokes with some friends. You know.
Absolutely.
We've known each other for a long time.
I'm aware. We're friends. But you'll say that to a friend, and you won't mean anything by it because you can get away with that with a friend. And even though it's something that would be a stereotype, or, you know, like, you're of Italian descent, I'm of English descent, and, you know, I have the stereotypical British stiff upper lip and a rod up my butt about a lot of stuff. And the thing is that we make these kinds of jokes, and it's not something that we mean to be racial or stereotypical. It is something that is purely based on those long-standing jokes that we know we can make with each other. And if we thought it would offend the person, we wouldn't do it. And I think that that's the thing about, like, with James Bond, I look back, to tie it all back, is I look at the intent of the movie. And I don't think that the intent of that era was to do something that was particularly demeaning. This is a representation of how people thought. We've realized that it's wrong. We've moved on.
We don't do it anymore.
We don't do it, and we shouldn't.
We were trying. I think the expression was meant to be this suave kind of devil-may-care spy. that like you couldn't really pin down, and he was going to do whatever he wanted, and you still loved him for it.
And the thing
you know?
people still
like
loved
you
him.
still loved him for it. Like even I, like as a girl growing up, like in my teenage years, like I love James Bond movies.
Yes. And the thing is,
I still liked Captain Marvel. So.
The movie's still fun. I mean, it's still fun to watch her
so
beat
great
Jude
movies.
Law with a spaceship or whatever.
Right.
And one example I know we won't get into here, but is like Eddie Murphy's Raw and Delirious, where you have this entire audience full of people laughing at the gay jokes that he's doing. But now people are like, oh, that's horrible. You should feel ashamed. You should feel be in trouble for it. Like, well, what about the 2,000 people that were in his audience? How should they feel? These are things, and Eddie Murphy has said this. These are things that I said at the time that were funny then and aren't acceptable now, and we moved on. And that's what we do. I don't agree with shaming people for Twitter posts that were made 15 years ago. Disney made the right choice rehiring James Gunn.
100%.
It's a different world, but I'm very much with you in that I think losing it would be a shame.
Yeah.
Losing, I don't want to see us go to a place where we pretend it didn't happen. Because I think culturally it's important to know what the culture was at the time.
Right. I agree.
We can't learn any other way. We can't know. And, the themes that you see through art over time are important. Whether that art happens to be, fine art or movies. And they're a very good expression of what the times were.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you want to take a look at a reflection of any culture, take a look at the art that they produce. So again, my example, James Bond couldn't make it today, at least in the way that it was made in the 1960s. The campiness is gone. The sexism is gone. James Bond is a wholly new creation, and you could never do that the same way ever, ever again. That's my example. Sydnee, what's the thing that we couldn't do today that was made at the time and we all loved it?
So I'm going to talk about something I'm super excited about, and because
I
haven't shut up about it.
I am well aware. Ever since the announcement at E3, which I let you know about, by the way.
I knew about it before you let me know.
No,
I was well aware.
Oh, come on.
I was well aware. I was in that. I was watching the live feed screaming in my living room. Dude.
All I gotta say is this topic, depending on when this comes out, could be very topical. So
yeah.
All right. Here we go.
So we're waiting right now. What is it? March. Right now the release date is planned for April if they don't push it back again. And so what I'm going to talk about is Final Fantasy VII, which is a game that I've been in love with for ages. I didn't play it in 97. I played it in 98. I played the Game of the Year edition.
Green label.
And yes, the green label.
Oh,
See, that's the version I have
green label.
on PlayStation 1. That's now $75 if you buy it pre-owned.
No kidding.
And I paid like $8.99.
So $4 on Steam.
Right. But I want to talk about it because when we first started looking at a remake for this game, way back when the PlayStation 3 was being like talked about at E3, and they made the mistake. Sony made the deadly mistake. They made a tech demo, and what they used for that tech demo was the opening scene of FF7.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the FF7 fans, myself included, lost our minds. There was going to be a remake. It was the thing we were waiting for. What I should have looked up the year on this.
It was 05 or 06.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Because I know that the PlayStation 3 came out on the market in North America in 06. So I think it was 05.
So it was 05 E3 probably.
Yeah.
Most likely.
Yeah.
So we all lost our minds. We were like, shut up and take my money. And like Square had to come out, or Square or Sony, whoever was talking at the time, was like, no, it's not happening. Calm down. And we're like, yes, it is. And they were like, no, it's not. And that went on for another 15 years.
Yeah, Half-Life 3 is coming out soon, by the way.
So finally, like at one point, Square gave in and made spinoffs, and we were like, yay, but where's our remake?
That first-person shooter one or something? Like
Dirge Cerberus.
I have a love-hate relationship with that game.
Yeah.
I want to, I'll talk about that another night.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, so finally, like, we did get the news of a remake. E3, give me the date, because my date's
that was 2016. That was 2016.
16.
I thought they were going to be jockeying for a 2017 20-year.
Okay, so here's
release.
the thing, though. When that release came out, when they showed the initial trailer,
it was 2015. I'm sorry.
Yeah, 2015. So the end was literally, if I remember it right, because I was screaming in my living room. I was losing my mind. It literally, the end of the trailer was like, "It'll be here when it's ready." Like,
oh gosh, the
and we
Duke
were
of
like,
Forever conundrum. No.
Okay. Okay.
Silence for years.
Well, wait. It wasn't really silence for years. We've gotten pretty steady updates. It went through a lot of iterations. And the problem was that when we saw the original tech demo, it was shot by shot the original game. And of course, at the time, all of us fans were clamoring, we want a shot by shot remake. That's what we thought we wanted.
Yeah.
I feel like it kind of happened naturally. Like, I don't feel like I've seen anybody who's real upset about what's happened. Like, obviously, we're not getting a shot-by-shot remake of the game. The game is a completely different monster now. But somehow, like, we all came to the conclusion at the same time that they were doing this, that it was okay.
Right.
Because as they started to release things about the game, I think we started to think about it as fans and be like, wait, you can't do that now. This isn't going to work. It's a very specific type of RPG. It's somewhat of a slog to play through. I got lost on that map many a time. There are side quests on there that you will never find if you don't know they exist. In my opinion,
I got like a third of the way through the first disc, and I'm like, I'm out.
He was out. But you can beat the whole game and like not find everything.
Oh,
like
gosh.
It's one of those
yeah.
games.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's from that era. But like, there's a lot of even like decently major story plots that you should probably know about that you can miss.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You can avoid an entire continent. It's bizarre.
Yep.
So anyway, like I think all of us started thinking about this as we were getting news because at one point it was like, oh, it's going to be an episodic release, and we're like, great, it's going to be a bunch of DLC.
Right.
And now we've got like I think it's the first 8 hours of the original game, which is Midgar, is like now its own like 60 to 70 hour game without side quests, and I don't know what's going to happen. It's a lot. It's a lot of game. I'm still like, shut up and take my money. I think it looks beautiful. I played the demo last week. And it handles like a dream if you're not trying to talk on the phone while you're playing it.
Yeah. Ideally.
Don't play it the first time trying to talk with a friend on the phone, being like, this is so cool. Like, you'll get your butt kicked. It's not the game that you can play munching a sandwich, like we used to.
Right.
But my point in saying all this is to say that, like, we all thankfully realized, I think, as fans, there may be a few out there who are still, not happy about it. But I haven't seen anybody that realized it's not a property that could be made the way it was made before. It wouldn't work. There were gaping plot holes in this game from the beginning. There were a lot of gaping problems that we as fans were like, yeah, but we love it. Like,
yeah.
yeah. We love it. We know they're there.
I like the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but it's not great.
It's not great.
Shakespeare.
I think FF7 was a little better than that.
It's a lot better.
But yeah, I'm excited to see them remake them, and I'm really excited for all the developments that I've seen. Everything looks really well thought through. Like, not just beautiful. Like, it's not just a beautiful graphic remake, which is what we thought we wanted. It's really being like detailed and brilliantly thought through. The combat system, which is not something that I was all that concerned about, because it was a turn-based RPG, handles like a dream. Like, when you get it, it feels really good.
So it's real time. Oh my gosh.
It's real time, and it's a lot. Like, it's a lot to handle. But when you get it, it feels wonderful. I don't know any other way to explain it. Just go play the demo.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a lot more interesting for people like you, people who never got into the first game.
I couldn't do the turn-based thing, and that's why I'm really excited about what you're talking about. I think that turn-based RPGs, I don't know if are they disappearing? I mean, you guys know the video game landscape.
Largely.
Yes. You get the occasional niche release of things like Octopath Traveler or Trails of Cold Steel 3 came out this past year.
But the retro, like throwbacks, like almost commentaries on what was past.
Yeah, they are. They're
okay. Like Shovel Knight being a commentary on the past of side-scrolling adventure games.
Cold Steel is its own like huge deal. It's like huge in Japan, huge among the Japanese loving community in America as well. Right. But Octopath Traveler is definitely more of a ode to
what was
the past.
Kind of, yeah.
Even graphically, it's this is in this 2D pseudo 3D style.
And there's a couple of those. Like, I don't know if the Tales games are still turn-based. I haven't played one in a really long time.
Those are action.
Are they action now? The early ones were turn-based.
Well, it's interesting. It makes me wonder then if turn-based RPGs are going the way that the side-scroller was in the late 90s. where you had like Castlevania, Symphony of the Night was kind of the last great side scroller from the original side-scrolling era. I mean, they tried to do it with Mega Man 8, and it was kind of a flop. And suddenly everybody was going 3D.
I've seen a couple indie games do side scrollers that look really good.
Well, we have a side scroller revival right now, but back then they just died quick.
But I mean, they're mainstream again, which I never thought would happen. Like, I never thought that Sonic Mania would be a huge game that's like the best reviewed Sonic game since Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2. I never thought that I'd see where Shovel Knight is still $25 on Steam 5 years after it came out. You have and Cuphead just dominating the world. I mean, who has not played Cuphead at this point?
I haven't, actually.
You haven't?
I haven't.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to gift that to you on Steam. It is... I am afraid of most super hard games. Like, I would never do Dark Souls or something like that. But Cuphead, it's phenomenal.
I'll watch a Let's Play of Dark Souls.
It's worth grinding through. But I think that
of course you do.
But this kind of brings up another point.
You would be the Dark Souls person in the room.
Yeah. You are, of course, the Dark Souls person in the room. But this brings up the point. You mentioned the pendulum swinging earlier, and I think that there is a pendulum that swings with styles of games. Like, you're right. They couldn't make the original Final Fantasy VII as a mainstream game now. But maybe they could in 10 years when it's that nostalgic. Because you look back at 30 years ago, we had Super Mario Brothers and Sonic the Hedgehog first coming out. And now we see that revival of that style of game
It'll be interesting to see. I don't think with things like the Final Fantasy franchise we'll see it happen. Final Fantasy's been moving away from it since...
Oh, what, 10?
12, I think officially.
Okay.
12, 10 was still a turn-based. 12 was the first like non-turn-based Final Fantasy, and actually the best thing about that game, in my opinion, was the battle system. I feel like everything we've seen now has been built kind of on that initial idea to get away from the turn-based.
Right.
But the thing that it comes down to is like, this was a brilliant story. If you're a fan, I think everybody agrees the story is brilliant. I think it's beautifully tragic.
Oh gosh, yes.
But it's a brilliant story told on like a 36-bit like imagery with a few really pretty cutscenes, and then like a really like slow battle system that's like, it's kind of a grind to play.
That's what I heard about it.
I think you'll enjoy the new, because it plays much more like a today AAA game. It's very, very actually, it's one of the fastest paced battle systems I've ever played. Like, that demo pretty much throws you into the deep end of the pool.
Because I like Street Fighter 3 Alpha, like this ridiculous speed combo stuff, and that
you're controlling literally all your characters, basically. Like, you're jumping from one character to another, fighting an enemy. So you really have to kind of be on point. And in the demo, they framed it to teach you to do this. So one character has certain things you need, and one character has other things you need. So you don't have a choice. You can't just play as Cloud and let your party do its thing. You have to be actively engaged. There is a more classical combat mode for people who want the throwback to the original.
Right.
But I think it was really intended to be played in a more fast-paced way.
Right.
And I think it's going to feel a lot more like the AAA games of today. That's always a dubious slope, because like anytime you get like a big AAA game, there are people who are like, oh, like I don't like it. It doesn't feel like everything.
Complaint culture is a thing.
I mean, I think you're always going to have the naysayers of the popular things.
Yeah.
But I think what they're doing was really well thought through. They fleshed out the story so much more. And
more than it already was.
Oh, it's
the 3 discs that original game was.
Yeah, the 3 discs that it originally. I don't even know. We don't even have a count of how many games we're getting now. They haven't released a number. So this first game is the first 8 hours of the original.
Yeah.
As long as it stays successful, they're just going to keep releasing it.
Like Star Wars movies.
I'm okay with it as long as it stays good. As long as they keep this kind of attention to detail.
Yeah.
Which I feel like they have.
I think they
I'm
have
okay
to.
with it.
That's the thing about a great story. That's why I love things that transcend their genre or transcend their the time that they were made. Like Final Fantasy VII stuck in people's minds so much. You don't hear people
21 years
arguing
later.
like, oh, we need a Final Fantasy 8 or 9 remake. Nobody argues that. Nobody cares, you know. Final Fantasy VI, well, yeah, okay, I'll download it on Steam when it's on sale over the weekend. But Final Fantasy VII has retained this incredible stranglehold on pop culture more than any other RPG maybe ever. I mean, except maybe for Skyrim, but that's because it's so new.
It's a decade old now.
Yeah, so was
hard to believe,
it
isn't
2011
it?
that came out?
It's really hard
coming
to
up,
believe
yeah.
now.
And it's still like $50. Like, but they keep
Well, that
updating
says something. Like,
they keep updating it graphically, you know. But I think that's a real testament to something when it can last so long. And it's kind of interesting that you say you couldn't do it today. You couldn't do that today. But there's something in it that sticks, that still transcends for so long after it was made, that you still say, yes, you couldn't make it today, but I want it updated. I want the new version of this for today that would make sense in today's culture.
and I will say this, like, if they had turned it out with better graphics in the same format, I think that even the fans that thought they wanted that, and I was one of those fans for a really long time.
Right.
I was like, don't change anything. I think we would have been vastly disappointed. The amount of attention to detail that they seem to be putting into this, like if it holds up, and everything I've seen makes me feel really good about it. Like, I think we all sat around holding our breaths and like not wanting to get excited.
Right.
And we've given up now. Like, we're like, it looks really good. Like, shut up and take my money, you know, unfortunately.
Yeah. So sometimes, you know.
But that's a lot of work to put into a 21-year-old property to revive it.
It is. Which actually begs the point with this question, you know, or this overall topic of you couldn't do it today. It's not necessarily a negative thing. It's not like, oh, you couldn't make that today. Sometimes that's a really good thing. Like, you don't want what you think you want. The rose-colored glasses of nostalgia. Like, I mentioned Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles earlier, and I went back and watched a couple of years ago the first series of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from the 80s as an adult. Oh, Lord have mercy. What I thought as a kid was my Citizen Kane became my Plan 9 from outer space.
That's another thing we'll reference every week. Citizen Kane.
Apparently, we're going to reference that a lot.
Every week. You know, we are Orson Welles fans.
So to your point, though, and this is going to wrap back to your, I'm going to wrap back around to your James Bond point in just a second. Yeah. We're agreeing a lot tonight. But to your point, I actually went back and tried, like, because I know once the new one comes out, I'm like, great, I'm never going to play the original again. I've got to play it before it comes out.
Right.
So I went back and I started playing the original PS1 FF7 on the disc. Mm-hmm. And I love it, but like, it's real rough today. Like,
yeah.
You know, I mean, like, granted, going in understanding how rough it was, but like, there are moments when you're like, we were dedicated as kids, weren't we?
Yeah.
Like,
when I first played Final Fantasy VII, those polygonal arms, I just could not get over them.
Cloud
the
looks
blocks
a lot better than he did.
Gosh, but it's funny.
A lot. Like, oh god,
the thing that really did it for me.
That sprite was.
Oh yeah.
Oh my god.
Well, aside from the turn based and everything, the lack of dialogue really, to me,
it was like reading a novel.
It is.
There was a novel, and it was not that well translated from the Japanese. I've got to say,
the boss battle I was in, I kept losing because I realized there was a mistranslation in the instruction they were giving you. There was something you had to do that they were telling you to not do, and it was driving me insane. So I finally went online and like, oh yeah, everybody knows you just have to do this.
You just have to do this, yeah.
Like, oh, for Christ.
They got main characters' names wrong, and everybody knows what I'm talking about. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Is it Eris or Aerith?
Yeah, no one's.
Yeah, exactly.
But real quick, to wrap it back around to your James Bond point, like, we're both talking about properties that are like, oh, it couldn't be made today, but yet they've reinvented it in a way, and I feel like they're doing the same thing with FF7. I hope it lives up to my dreams. That they kind of did with Daniel Craig in James Bond. Yeah, where they created kind of a new Bond, like. Casino Royale was like nothing any of us had seen before.
No, it was funny. I think it was Stephen King who said that he went and saw Casino Royale and he said this is the best Bond film since Goldfinger, and he went home and watched Goldfinger and he said no, Casino Royale is the best Bond.
It's the best Bond film.
Yeah, well, like with Casino Royale, like they saw the success of the Bourne identity and the Bourne series in general, and it was like, maybe Robert Ludlum had something there and ran with it. So
I also like that there's no shaky cam in James Bond. So there's
no, the camera work's actually beautiful in that film.
It is.
That parkour
intro
scene.
parkour scene.
Oh God, yes.
Which, a little fun fact: the guy who directed Casino Royale is the same one who directed GoldenEye, which is the best of the Pierce Brosnan films by far. And speaking of old games, GoldenEye, I mean, with no dialogue, wow, it's all time.
And you know what the funny thing is? You're actually a GoldenEye fan.
I love GoldenEye.
You love GoldenEye.
But I love GoldenEye. It was such a revelation to have a first-person shooter that was made specifically for a console where you had analog control for the first time. And at the time, I didn't do the strafing thing, so I didn't care about the fact that you couldn't really strafe properly with it while using the analog stick. Mm-hmm. But it was just such an amazingly well-done game. That's another one that you can't make today, but more for rights and lawyer reasons than the fact that you just couldn't make it for.
There's no licensing for that now.
They did remake it.
God, they did
Back
with Daniel
Wii.
Craig. It was GoldenEye, Rogue Agent, or whatever.
Really poorly done.
It was awful
because EA has a license for the Bond series.
We could have a whole discussion about games that were badly remade for the Wii.
Gosh, that.
It's not that I dislike the Nintendo Wii. It's just like a lot of the games that were ported onto it
just awful.
Just didn't work.
You know,
it's true.
You couldn't do the Wii today because we've moved on properly. So that
would have been a good topic.
So James Bond, FF7. Jeremy, what's your example?
My example, my primary example. We're going back in the past. A little bit further than you. All
right.
I'm going with H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos.
I think I know where you're going to go with this, but
I have a few different directions I'm going to be going with. This.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's more than one reason why. I guess I should talk into the mic, shouldn't I?
Ideally.
We'll find out.
Well, so, if you could describe Lovecraft, the way you would describe Lovecraft is let's see, basically his horror is of the unknown. And how do you go with the unknown? You build the suspense and things like that with the unseen. Today, when you get... Why am I blanking out all of a sudden?
It's okay.
All right.
Let
Let me get my brain here and let me look at my notes right quick. La, la, la. All right. So the way you describe Lovecraft, his horror is indescribable. And the unknown horrors he painted pictures of was meant to show art and significance to the cosmos in general. And it's like, how do you do that? It's in the written word. That's the only way. We have a significant thing in the way of the written word today. That's called movies.
Yeah.
Would he be able to create the following that he did in the modern sense without...
Not in the genre that he was in. Not in science fiction or
in horror.
Kind of horror, horror fiction kind of.
Yeah.
I don't know that you...
Sci-fi horror.
Sci-fi horror. Yeah. Depending on which, if you read At the Mountains of Madness, that's sci-fi horror because it's about alien invasion and insanity. And Color Out of Space is kind of a mixture of the two. But...
that's his most sci-fi is the Color Out of Space in general. But let's see. You have most written works nowadays don't have major followings. Like Harry Potter, 50 Shades of Grey are two main examples. Though, one way actually, who was actually way ahead of his time, was he was a major collaborator and is one of the major reasons why he's known today. He wasn't known back then. Mm-hmm. He wasn't known really at all until after he passed away, and it's through the collaborative effort of other writers that eventually he became into prominence. Where are these ideas coming from? It came from him. And it's like you actually see the results of his collaboration in many different things today, like in creepypastas,
right,
and particularly in the SCP Foundation. They use his foundation of collaboration to create the SCP Foundation. If you don't know what that is, it's a series. It's essentially a wiki which has tons of short stories about monsters that had to be contained or can't be contained,
Right.
and if they don't get them contained, they could destroy the world. Essentially, that oversimplifies it a little bit.
Yeah,
but that's an interesting thing to see that he was able to survive because of that idea. But since we're in the modern day of the internet, his collaborative effort might have gone to blind ears. Because if you put something like he wrote back then, which is written in a much more archaic way, it's like a lot of what he writes is in the first person, yet it's not a first-hand account of the events. So it's some dude telling another dude a story.
Yeah.
When you have another dude telling a story about another guy, it can be dry, slow, plotting.
And it really only works in like that kind of campfire storytelling sense, which you can do, I feel like, in written word.
Yeah. And yeah, like you read the Call of Cthulhu, and it is all letters from other people, and it's very secondhand, which adds to kind of the mystery and the horror of it as well.
Almost like Bram Stoker's Dracula, though.
Yeah,
The book.
Yeah, in that sense.
In that it's written out of letters and diary entries, and
which is a very popular thing. I mean, you read like Call of the Wild by Jack London, and like the dialogue is like 3 lines of dialogue in the whole book,
right?
You know, and
it's
a very popular
that's
thing to
very
describe.
typical of his things. Like occasionally you get dialogue, you don't get very much. Most of it is description of what's going on.
Yeah, but
So that goes along with, like, you have this dry, archaic style he's written in. Then you bring in the fact that visually you can't bring him to life because it's all based on things that are incomprehensible. As soon as you imagine something, as soon as it's created, it's no longer incomprehensible.
right.
Therefore, like, the way he is represented on the screen, you essentially, the way you would have to do it is have things representing the underlings of this greater threat.
Right.
And eventually these underlings are just not going to be enough because all you are ever doing is referring to what is greater than these little things here.
And I think that that's something about Lovecraft that really appeals to me is that he's so entrenched in his medium, the written word. That's what I like about the original book. What was that kind of horror movie that Natalie Portman was in fairly recently? Annihilation.
Yeah.
The book reminds me a lot of Lovecraft in this sense, in that it is very much of its medium, where you have one character saying, I see this in this room, and you have another character saying, I see this in this room, and it's completely different. And it's a really hard, if not impossible, thing to represent on the screen. So they changed a lot of that for the movie.
How did they end up doing it?
Well, in the movie, it's just that the world is starting to kind of change evolve and change around them. And it's not that they see different things, it's that the world is starting to change and they all see the same thing. They'll have different opinions about what they see. Like, oh, no, didn't you see when they cut that guy open that all these snakes were in him? Like, oh, that was just an optical illusion. Like, they'd argue about that, but they couldn't just represent that at the same time these two people were seeing something different. That's something you can only do with the written word. And so with Lovecraft, you have this horror, and it is the horror of the unknown. It's very, by its definition, an indescribable, unknowable horror, because to see it is to immediately go mad. So it's automatically the worst thing that you can think of, and it's a very personal thing. So Lovecraft is... It's like with the color out of space. Like, the whole point of it is it's a color no one's ever seen before. Well, as soon as you make the movie Color Out of Space, no matter how good it is, you're seeing whatever color they chose.
You destroyed the entire illusion of...
You show a color. Okay,
exactly.
What's that? You know?
Then, well, another thing that is to his detriment is the fact that everything he wrote, the longest thing he ever wrote was at the Mountain of Madness.
Yeah.
It's novella size. If you're going to be a popular writer, you need to get to novel length.
Yeah.
He didn't create enough content as a short story writer to ever be noticed. He would go years sometimes without putting out a story. And so he would get lost in the abyss of the forums and things like that, where he could have made an impact.
Right.
And he would have never gotten published by a major publisher. And indie publishing, he was way too reclusive to ever be able to do that.
No, and
So-
of course it wasn't an option at the time. You're really
Exactly.
he never
So-
would have had enough money to be able to do that.
So we had this unique mix back then of, hey, movies weren't nearly as huge as they were. So the visual medium wasn't nearly as important. We had magazines like Pulp Fiction magazines like Weird Tales and stuff like that thriving at that time, in his amateur magazines where he got his start, where he was able to get these short stories into circulation and eventually be discovered, even though it was after him passing.
Yeah. I was thinking about what H.P. Lovecraft would be now, because you do have writers who are kind of underground and writing on the internet. And I think you could have like an H.P. Lovecraft kind of person now, but would that person in that role create something as important to popular culture as the Cthulhu mythos, as the Great Old Ones? Because it is a terrifyingly imaginative and thorough worldview that he created. It's not just this mythos. I mean, that's like a whole worldview that he invented. I see that on the level of Tolkien creating Middle Earth is what Lovecraft did, and it based on very few short stories. Do we even have a lot of the Cthulhu mythos that we think about now has been carried on by other writers and in popular culture? But it's why
Is considered canon to it, because
Yeah.
within his letters that he's written, he encouraged other people to use what he had
And
to
I
be
also-
able to make their other
And I
creative.
don't think that's something a lot of creators are doing now, unfortunately. Like, a lot of creators are not even open to that sort of collaboration. You know what I mean? Where it's like, hey, I started this world. I want to see where it goes. We see it a little bit in fandom. You know, in individual fandoms, you'll see where there are gaps in plots. Like, I know, I've seen it over the years in FF7 where there are so many gaps in that plot that people have kind of just filled in things.
Right.
And some of us just accept it. Like, for instance, when they came out with the spinoffs, like, Zach had a canonized last name that we all made up for him, and then Square came out and said, like, no, it's fair. Like,
Yeah.
and we're like, okay, fine,
Yeah.
we'll change it. Like,
Yeah.
but like, I don't think you see creators encouraging that kind of collaboration that I think naturally people do on their own.
Yeah,
It's a rare thing.
that's the interesting thing about the horror cultures. Like, SCP is such a unique thing. It's literally a wiki where people are spending hundreds of hours, man hours, just writing this lore that becomes the official lore. And on the wiki it says, hey, if you can profit off of this if you want, you just have to credit us, and you have to allow others to use what you just made in the future.
That's very cool. It's kind of like it's the
Really
Linux of the writing
cool.
world.
Yeah, it is.
You know, that's why I like
And-
writing
It is.
prompts on Reddit so much. If you don't go to writing prompts, I love writing prompts. There are people who've written whole books off of the writing prompts on Reddit. And I put a bunch up there because I just want to see what people are going to do with them. One I put up a little while ago was guy's at a doctor's office, and he says to the doctor, so these pills are going to make the hallucinations, they're going to make the voices stop, right? And the doctor says, yes, you'll never hear her again. And the guy says, I never said that the voice was female. And the stuff that people wrote off of that was fantastic. All these stories that went in different directions and crazy stuff. And you see this level of, I want to give something to the world because I know that I'm by myself not good enough to be able to take this to the level it needs to be taken. And there's something to be said for creative ownership of stories, but you know, as a musician, seeing all the 20th century lawsuits over use of melody and structure is very frustrating because I do see this as such a collaborative thing, and I think it's something that's
sometimes
lost.
It's really interesting to put something like that out into the world and just watch it sort of grow. Because sometimes you don't have the skill to do what you know could be done with it.
Yeah.
That's an insane topic, and I kind of love it, and I want to go look at it now.
Yeah, it's just a fascinating where he got the start with it, and where like it even influenced things that are affecting modern society, modern pop culture, where, you know, like We have the SCP Foundation now. Back then, which is still influential today, we had Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian series, which takes place in the same universe as the Cthulhu mythos.
Now that I didn't know.
So,
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, they were friends. They were part of the same circle, which is called the Lovecraft circle, which many writers took place in, and they just collaborated with each other.
That's fun.
So
I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't know
right.
They took place in the same universe. I think that's interesting. I'm actually. This didn't go where I thought it was going to go with it. With you couldn't do it today with Lovecraft, because the first thing everybody thinks of is the massive amounts of racism.
Hold on.
In his stories.
He's
Hold
getting
on.
there.
Oh, you're getting there. Okay,
Yeah,
you're getting there.
He's getting
like
there.
I said, I have multiple reasons.
Fair enough. Okay.
I wanted to get into like the visual medium. You can't represent the way he wrote in a visual medium. Then it's like his archaic writing. That's the next thing. Then the next level is the fact that short stories just don't work in today's market.
Which hurts.
Okay, I'm actually going to argue that one for you. I think especially in horror, we've started to, over the last half a decade or so, see like anthology style TV shows, and American Horror Story aside, which is whole seasons. We've seen things like Black Mirror. We've seen, there's another one on Amazon Prime. It's an Amazon original.
Well,
and I think we are, my point only to that is only to say that I think we are starting to see the shorter story, the single episode story told.
Yeah.
See, the big thing is it's not the single episode story, it's a single season. That's like 10 hours worth of content, in which at most some of his stories are 15 minutes at most you're going to dig out of it. Then you have At the Mountains of Madness, which you could get a movie out of.
Yeah.
But
Okay. H.P. Lovecraft would be a podcaster. He'd be doing something like lore.
actually, he would be very similar to lore. Actually,
Yeah.
that's an interesting way of thinking about it. But the problem is he was also incredibly reclusive.
True.
So he would never have, like, the only reason why he became like more civilized, well, not civilized because his parents made him civilized, but started getting into the more progressive style culture was because of his wife. And if you actually see, like we talked about the racism that was in his stories, later in his life, he began, you could see from his letters and things like that, he began to regret some of those initial feelings. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, when his mind started deteriorating before he died, he reverted back to some of those sensibilities. But I guess that should lead us into, hey, here's probably the biggest reason why it wouldn't work today. And his stuff was incredibly racist at points. Yeah. Like, if we, let me give you an example. Let me read this.
Oh, no.
Well, I have the bleep noises ready to go.
Don't worry. There's no words. He doesn't use words. It's just the way he uses descriptors is just poor. It is bad. It's like, this isn't the way you should look at things. Mm-hmm. Like, objectively today, we realize that. And of course, as with Bond, product of his time.
Right. So you look at it as a reflection of what was happening.
Yeah. So this is from Facts Concerning the Late Arthur Germain and His Family. This is from the final paragraph of that story. All right. The reason why Arthur Germain's charred fragments were not collected and buried lies within what was found afterward. Principally, the thing in the box, the stuffed goddess, was a nauseous sight, withered and eaten away, but it was clearly a mummified white ape of some unknown species, less hairy than any recorded variety, and infinitely nearer mankind, quite shockingly so. Detailed description would be rather unpleasant, but two salient particulars must be told, for they fit in revoltingly with certain notes of Sir Wade Germain's African expeditions and with the Congolese legends of the White God and the Ape Princess.
Ah. Okay. Yeah.
And as you see, it's like, particularly that last line, the White God and the Ape Princess, that is a incredibly vile way to look at the world. It's like looking at somebody as inferior, like
right. And it's such it's not even something that's focused on. It's just kind of an aside. It's kind of like the slapping the butt of the woman in James Bond, and she goes off. It's not something you're focusing on as terrible, which almost makes it more terrible.
Makes it worse.
It makes it worse. You're just like, well, of course I don't consider them as human beings. Let's move on with this sci-fi story. It's just kind of indicative of where the thought process is of the average person, or at least of him anyway, at the time.
It was like if it happened just once, you could just kind of like with Song of the South, we can just ignore that happened.
Like, yep, Disney, it never happened. Never happened.
The problem is it consistently comes up within even some of his most famous pieces, like The Shadow over Innsmouth. That's a big one where fish people interbreed with regular humans and how interbreeding is a bad thing.
Right.
And it just doesn't...
Thematically, it's not something you could do today.
No,
exactly.
No, it's not. It's interesting how multifaceted the Lovecraft. I think that the thing is, though, I think that there is a lot of Lovecraft that would work today. It's just that he would be working either in different mediums, or that his work would be represented differently. Well, obviously, the racism couldn't work.
You have to take him as a person, though, within this regard. He was like I said, he is a very reclusive person. He was not out in society. Right. He closed himself off from society, and his wife was really the only reason he had any connection to it.
Yeah. I think that, the thing is, like, it's kind of, you look at him and it's almost like he didn't really work at the time. Like, when he was working, when he was at his most popular, he was already gone.
He's gone.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So it's almost like he didn't really work in his own lifetime. It's only his legacy that kind of grew as people discover these. It's kind of like Nick Drake. If you've ever heard of Nick Drake, he was a guitar player and singer-songwriter. In his lifetime, he sold maybe 5,000 albums. But after his passing, and he died, I think of like a prescription drug overdose, and he was only in his early 30s. But the 3 albums that he put out became hugely influential. You've heard the songs. They were using Volkswagen commercials. And so he's kind of the famous person after they die. It's kind of like artists are more famous after they die. So I kind of look at Lovecraft
Emily Dickinson
kind of way. Yeah.
Well, and there's a lot of and I'm not a Lovecraft fan personally. I told you this, like, I haven't read any of the works really or anything, but I know there's a lot of influence still. So,
absolutely, there's a ton of influence.
Spanned,
like Bloodborne. That's a video game, I've mentioned many times.
And it's almost like he became popular after his death, and the influence kind of lives on in strange ways. But, like, could you do the material? No, I think you're right. I do think it's probably one of the reasons, like, we've gotten more anthology series like Lore and like Black Mirror and, things like that. Because I think the horror genre is particularly adept at that right now.
It is.
Like, they're the only ones I really see doing...
Because it can't tell one huge story, because eventually you
get bored.
Like you talked about in the last episode. Yeah,
that's why Bates Motel had to end after like 6 seasons, because you just can't tell that story anymore.
Exactly. That's why that season-long arc seems to be like this perfect medium for telling the story.
Well, and let's even talk like a lot of horror that's gone too long. Like, let's take something basic like Halloween. Well, like, how many times can you redo Michael Myers?
Thing.
Like,
there's just you try to tell his origin story in one of the movies.
You almost destroy what's scary about it after a while.
The mystery is the point.
What's wonderful about this conversation right here is, guess what we're getting? We're getting a TV show brought to you by Jordan Peele on HBO. Lovecraft Country, and it's going to be an anthology series.
Hey, there you go.
so
we
we're
come up with examples that are being remade at the moment.
That's why the Twilight Zone worked so well. The Twilight Zone was amazing because it was one episode of this one horrifying thing, and then it moved on.
Oh, I forgot about Twilight Zone.
I love Twilight Zone. That's my favorite.
The greatest anthology. I don't
know.
And I was actually an Outer Limits fan as a kid too. I think the thing is, that
was before my time.
You could
before both of our times,
right? There was the good Twilight Zone remake in the early '90s. That I liked as well.
It was good.
It was good.
Not the new one, though.
The best thing Grateful Dead ever did was that theme song to the new remake of Twilight Zone that came out in the early 90s. But I think you could have a Lovecraft today. It's just that you wouldn't know you had one until after he was gone. Mm-hmm. And it's the terrifying curse, I think, of that kind of artist, is that no matter what, they're just not going to be huge in their time, which is a shame.
Yeah, it was like you also have the factor that it's like we have a person, I mean, somebody that's coming to essentially revive his legacy because of like, hey, we're going to take out all the terribleness of it and give Jordan Peele, somebody who's a proven horror guy.
He's darn good at it.
Yeah.
It's funny. I remember him was like, oh, you mean the guy who did a really good impression of Obama on Mad TV? That guy? Like, yes. I mean, it's amazing.
Actually, he's really good at horror, yes.
Yeah, one of the best horror directors of today, you know. Get Out and Us are both phenomenal movies.
Is there a bigger career transition in the history of film than Jordan Peele? I mean,
yeah,
maybe not.
Maybe not. I mean, Clint Eastwood goes from being a tough guy on screen to the sensitive director, and you get the reconnaissance with Matthew McConaughey going from romantic comedies to The Lincoln Lawyer and all the serious stuff that he did. But Jordan Peele, that has to be the biggest
a little bit different.
That's the biggest bit flip.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's amazing at it, too.
What's great is he's able to tactfully interwove social messages into the stories that he makes that can help lead this type of horror into a better story.
Right.
You know?
It's insane. Okay. So I think we had 3 good examples today.
Things that can't be remade that are all being remade.
They're all being remade. Kind of.
Sort of.
In a very different form.
In all very different
Each one looks completely different from what they started out as.
Yeah, new Bond is not Ian Fleming's Bond. New Final Fantasy VII is not old Final Fantasy. And we didn't even touch on the cross-dressing scene in Final Fantasy VII that they're still keeping in there.
They're keeping, and it honestly looks kind of amazing. Like, it really does.
It's fair.
It's amazing. Like, the fans are really excited because, like, in the original, obviously, we're dealing with, like, 32-bit graphics?
Yeah.
And, like, it looked the same no matter what you did. There's a whole side quest to this.
Each polygon.
Stuff you have to get. And it doesn't matter what you do. It all looks the same. You have a little bit different outcome in the story.
Right.
Now you can actually see things. Like,
yeah.
Like, people are like, I really want that wig. Like,
yeah.
But I've heard they're doing it very tactfully. It's funny you mentioned that because, like, yes, they've kept the cross-dressing scene, but like the Honeybee Inn, which was basically a brothel in the original game, it is. And by the way, like, somebody's already done a video on YouTube of it. You can go look it up. But like, I can't remember who did it. I'll link it if we find it.
Yeah.
Did a video of like things you forgot about Midgar and FF7. Some of those things are things that you can sneak around the Honeybee Inn and find out are going on, and they're just really awkward and crazy.
Yeah.
And apparently, like, they've redone it so it's more like a nightclub now. So I'm gonna be really interested.
Hopefully they have like Easter eggs in there.
I'm really interested if they keep some of those scenes.
I bet they will.
That's the opposite direction of most things go, because you have things that people grow up with, and then it becomes more mature with the audience. But this is kind of a regression, actually.
I think I wouldn't count it so much as a regression, as a more like, I hate to use this terminology, but like almost a more politically correct way to do it. Like, I can see, like, it's amazing. This was like a rated T game, wasn't it? Or maybe an E game. I don't remember.
Yeah.
You're sneaking into a brothel at one point.
Right. And people get stabbed and die. Like, I mean, that was a game with a permadeath character. That didn't happen.
Yeah, it didn't happen.
So,
but I'm going to be really interested to see how they redo it. Like,
I'm just going to be curious.
I want to see if they keep some of the strange, like, there are weird things. Like, I don't know if you remember this. Like, you can look through keyholes of the different rooms in the original.
Yeah.
It's great crazy stuff going on.
The detail they put into that brothel scene. And then we had H.P. Lovecraft as example. And again, everything that we've mentioned today is being remade in one form or another. But I think that at the heart of each is that core of something about it that was central to the identity of what it was. That what's amazing in each of these examples is that you can get rid of some of that identity, or even all of it, and retain enough of what made it great that you can transfer that into something else, or into a new version, or into a new mold, and it works, which kind of blows my mind. Did we all win? Like, is that what happened?
We might have all won this week.
I don't know. I think they were all really good examples.
They're all good examples
for each of their particular things. They were all really good examples for like games, or games, movies, and writing. That there's so much about it that just couldn't exist now, but the heart of it was able to transfer.
Well, and
into the 21st century.
They're three properties that are very storytelling centric.
Yeah,
like these are stories that sort of, weirdly enough, all three of them in different ways sort of surpass.
Yeah. It's like people still really want that. They want to get rid of what was distasteful about it, whether it's the sexism in the camp, whether it's the crappy graphics and the lack of dialogue
and bad translations.
The bad translation.
Arms.
The slow.
You're really caught up on that, aren't you? The other thing is, I thought he was going to be way buffer than.
Yeah, the slow combat system.
Well, that huge sword. He should have the largest forearms of all time.
Yeah, it's mostly foam. You've been to cosplay conventions, and then Lovecraft. Getting rid of a lot of the racist content from the original short stories, and kind of holding on to what's great about the mystery of the Cthulhu mythos. Each of them have this heart of something that transfers to now. That I think that you just kind of filter them through a sieve, and you get the heart of what's great, and what's great is what's left over, and everybody says, oh yeah, this original thing was great but flawed, and now it's just great. Mm-hmm. So we all won. We're all millennials, so we all got participation trophies today. And of course,
you had to go there.
There's my trophy.
Finish your trophy, your water. So until next time, continue being casual fanatics. I know we will be. Bye.
Toodaloo.